All right, hi. Everyone all right? Everyone's still awake? Pradeep, thank you very much for keeping the audience awake. I think he's done a fabulous job. Everyone okay? Can I get a big round of applause if everyone's all right? Just to see if you guys are all right? Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. I go by Ajay. I head the People and Culture function at Foodpanda, Malaysia. Now, I have been asked today to speak about the well-being initiatives that make a difference for the hybrid world of work. Not just for Foodpanda, but I think as of 2020, a lot of organizations have shifted into either 100% remote or a somewhat hybrid work model, right? Now, I think a lot of us, as we come out of, lockdowns and what have you, we're all trying to figure out the new norm, right? And that's the flavor of the month. And it's always everyone's always talking about it. I wouldn't say a flavor of the month. I would say flavor for the next couple of years to come, right? People are still trying to figure things out. So at Foodpanda, now what we've done is we've built strategies which accommodate to different backgrounds while fostering a culture of advancement, growth, both personally as well as professionally. Now, a lot of us in this room will be able to relate if I was to say, coming back to work right now needs to be fueled by purpose. And I think Pradeep also mentioned this earlier. I need to be connected to what I do and why I'm doing it. Otherwise, I've developed skills over the last 2 years, which I really feel I have a much better time sharpening at home, right? I think a lot of us started baking or gardening or I don't know, fixing cars, designing stuff, right? Now coming back to work, I think one of the very typical Malaysian term was "Ayah, so mafan, I have to go back to the office again," right? Deal with traffic. What do you mean I have to wear shoes? What do you mean I have to wear socks again? Correct? A lot of us grapple with those things these days, right? 9 o'clock meeting, who does that, right? But it's super important to remember that as HR practitioners and people who basically develop systems and strategies within the organization, it's super important to remember that the people no longer work for us. We work for the people. So it's always a people-first approach, right? So it is crucial that every single thing that you do or you will do focuses on growth, not just professionally, but also personally. I need to feel that I'm being developed as an individual while I'm at work. Now, just to set the stage, about 85% of our guys follow the hybrid work model where we rock up at the office maybe 2 or 3 times a week. Now, that's not mandatory though. You come to the office if you need to be at the office, otherwise remote working remains as your primary option. I think this applies to a lot of people in this room. But we also have 15% of our workforce that is on 100% remote working functions, right? Remote working models. Now these are folks who are basically based in cities outside the Klang Valley where we don't have an actual physical office presence, right? Now, I think one of the most important things when it comes to, for my case study in particular, is I've spoken about this extensively. It's super important that we keep things relevant but also sustainable. I think a lot of HR practitioners became Kung Fu Pandas over the last couple of years, right? We developed oh my goodness, such amazing strategic initiatives. But then coming out of the pandemic, you realize that those things are just not sustainable. I mean, how do I continue to provide you with a 100 ringgit food allowance every week? Right? I'm not able to do those things anymore, right? So I think the biggest challenge for all of us is to make sure that every single thing that we're going to be developing must be sustainable. So what did we focus on? How are we hoping to make a difference? We're focusing on 3 different things. So we're focusing on well-being, but well-being here is not just the generic well-being, right? So we're shifting to a culture that embraces a growth mindset and the willingness to reimagine every aspect of the way work gets done. Now, more often than not, If you're not at the office 9 to 6, then you're just not a performer. If you're leaving at 6 on the dot, that's the end of it, correct? Now, the pandemic has taught us so many different things, right? I think Pradeep even mentioned it earlier. Are my people actually working? Are they there? I mean, we've seen memes on Instagram and TikTok of like people connecting their mouses to like rotating fans and stuff, correct? Like, you just need to remain online, and then you boast about it to your friends that, yeah, I can work from anywhere. And I could even be in Timbuktu sipping on a pina colada under like a coconut tree, right? For as long as I'm online. But guys, I mean, this also translates to a physical presence at work. I mean, I could be at work, but I don't know, just probably thinking about the weekend or the one that's coming or the one that just went past, right? So I think we focused on really reimagining the way work gets done. Just being there, being present, being at the office, clocking in 9 to 6 does not mean you are a productive employee. Now, the other thing that we looked at inclusivity, right? So we designed a dynamic and sustainable and strategic total rewards program that basically caters to unique employee personas. So we all talk about like flexible work arrangements right now, but does this really apply to everybody? It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. It will never be, because there are people in this room who will not be able to enjoy what we refer to as a flexible work arrangement, right? The people in operations, they have to be there. If you run a plant, you got to be around. So do you then feel like those guys get marginalized? Like, I mean, if my riders decided to wake up one morning and be like, oh, Ajay, I'm going to be working on like flexible arrangements, all of you will have no food, okay? So, I mean, everyone in this room has gone to like Ivy League schools, you know, is a high achiever, but like during the pandemic, we were all stuck at home. The only guys who were out there were 3 main colors, the green, the pink, and the orange: Grab, Foodpanda, Shopee. Right? This is the reality of it. Like, they kept us alive. They sent us food, they sent us parcels, they sent us like, you know, well-being kits from one friend to another, or like, you know, just please do not kill yourself kit, right? Like, please hang in there just a little bit more, right? Like, those are the guys who are out there. Did they go to Ivy League schools? Yeah, I mean, some of them probably did, but they had to feed their family, so they resorted to those things, right? So it's very, very important to remember, or rather, it's very important that I remember that I'm inclusive every single time that I draw something up. Now, then of course is the last one, which is flexibility. Now, you have to bridge the digital and physical world to ensure every employee can engage and contribute regardless of where, when, or how they're working. So we go back to the example of like, if you're not at the office 9 to 6, then you're not performing, right? You are not a part of the team. Now, that's not true anymore, right? So while I look at like these 3 different pillars, I also need to remember that these 3 different pillars, again, it's not a one-size-fits-all sort of an approach, right? So you have different people in your organization. You have anyone and everyone ranging from an Ajay to a Natasha to a Farah in the room, right? And while it would be almost impossible to come up with a persona for every single employee type, we narrowed it down to 5. So you have, and I would just like for you to bring your focus to the motivation as well as focus under the headers. So we will have the socializer, who basically is an outgoing and very driven person. You will have a tasker, who is quiet and more composed. You'll have a builder, who is like friendly, emotionally intelligent, and very diplomatic. You have the coaster, pessimistic and prone to stress more than to others. And then you have the achievers, who are basically driven to excel in everything and anything. Now, how did I figure out these different employee personas? I didn't do it on my own, right? Of course, like during the pandemic, we researched so many different things, and this was actually a template that was created by OC Tanner. And while I played around with it, I adapted the approach to first try it out within my team. So I have a team of about 30 people, just the people function. And as their manager, I was actually able to identify in my head who the different people, or what the different personas here were. Now, one of the biggest struggles for me, and maybe some of you in the room, is trying to shove or push down an agenda which I think is good, which I think they want. And I've realized over the last 2 years that that's not going to work anymore. You don't get to tell them what you think is going to work. You have to take a different approach. You have to actually ask them what they think would work. What do they think would be able to help them? So that was one of the biggest things that we started doing, right? So I started this experiment with like the 30 people in my team, and then I told them that, hey, so I did this little experiment, and this is who I think you are. Do you agree? Do you not agree? It was a very interesting experiment because some of them actually got really offended. And they're like, what do you mean? Like, how could you stereotype me? And I'm like, I'm not stereotyping. I'm actually trying to get to know you better, right? But yeah, here we are today. They're all still with the team, thankfully. And I think we had to take like different dialogues, right? For me to also explain to them what was my take, why did I think so, etc. So I think like when you ask, you will receive, and then you also need to justify and qualify your thoughts. So based on the different employee types or the different personas, we then developed initiatives. Because if I was an introvert and did something really good at work, and then you decided that, okay, I'm going to, I mean, we all, the entire HR world was taken by acknowledgement, right? Like we all wanted to acknowledge everybody. We all wanted to put them on a pedestal and like, you know, raise, like chant their names, you know, and take them for a little parade through town, because like a lot of employees were demotivated, a lot of people just didn't feel connected, etc. So we felt like acknowledging people would mean like, okay, we need to, you know, like party, put your name on a little poster, send it out company-wide, but introverts don't like that stuff. They just want to be in the back end of everything, right? So the employee personas were very important. It was very important to understand your people before you actually develop the strategic initiatives that would apply to them. Now, again, in a lot of functions, you will have people, you will have marketing, you will have finance, and all of these guys, they all come with different styles, right? Like, I mean, if you walk into a room and you look at a marketing person, they're usually the fashionable ones, like really funky, and then versus the finance people. I mean, I'm not going to say what the finance folks looks like, but I can see a couple of like smiles around the room, right? I mean, when I walk around the office in a t-shirt, people are like, are you really the head of people? Like, I mean, really? Are you really? And I'm like, no, I really have a real job. Like, I truly have a real job here. I mean, like, my hair has grown throughout the pandemic, but I'm growing it out for a good cause. I'm donating it to kids living with cancer, so we're making wigs out of it. Thank you. But yeah, I mean, Indian hair grows really fast, right? And like, I couldn't cut my hair for so long, so I was like, I better do something with it. But yeah, so it's very important that we don't just stereotype the people based on how they look, or assume that those are the things that they would want, but instead we ask them, right? So this was something which was pretty helpful for me. If you guys would like to know more about it, I'll be happy to share later. And based on the different employee personas, we then decided to, we then built things to make hybrid working work. All right, so what did we do? The first and most important thing was retesting and relearning. I mean, it's such a different world right now. We don't even know what protocols are anymore, right? Like when I meet a new person, I'm like, do I shake your hand? Do I fist bump? Do I give you an elbow bump? What do I do, right? Even more when it comes to work. So what used to be no longer is, right? 9 to 6, thing of the past. Rocking up at the office in your suit and tie, I mean, we still do it, but it's no longer something which is mandatory, all right? I remember speaking at a Maybank webinar where, like super early into the pandemic, and there was this student, so I come from the legal background, and this guy was also, he was in law school and returning from England, right? And he said to me, hey Ajay, so what do you think is my future like coming back to Malaysia? Because from what I can see, the job market is just like, it's terrible. Everyone's lost their jobs, you know, and I've been applying for a position as I come back into the country, and I think like the only position that I'd probably be able to land myself is one as a waiter at a restaurant, right? And I mean, in my head, I was like, well, even the restaurants are closed, but it was the mindset that I had a problem with, right? Because to this guy, because he was in law school in England, a job as a waiter was beneath him, right? So, and then it was in that very moment, because as he asked me this question, I was sitting at my workstation, staring out the window, and all I saw was, I kid you not, it was a traffic light, and there were 3 motorcycles, Grab, foodpanda, Shopee. And I'm like, guys, double degree, Ivy League school, I'm stuck at home. Those guys are out there having the time of their lives. You know, they're still seeing people riding, right? So I think my take to that guy was like, I think you probably need to just reimagine, like, work in the future is not going to be what we thought, what our parents thought it was, right? Like, my dad would say to me, you need to be a professional. And he was like, no one's going to take you seriously if you have too many tattoos. I mean, everyone in this room has heard it, right? Like, and we probably say the same things to like our children sometimes, right? And I'm like, no, work is no longer that way, right? Like, so it's very different. So we reimagine and we relearn the way of work, right? So we took time to understand what is most suitable to pandas at work, and then we found the right approach to well-being initiatives, regardless of whether they were working from home or they were physically present at the office 100%, or they were using one of our hybrid models, right? That's the first thing we did. The second thing we did was we looked at accessibility. Now, what a hybrid person, or a person working from home, a 100% remote, or a person who is basically, regardless of which mode of work you choose, you should have the exact, like, similar access, right? So the office remains open, and you come to the office when you want to come to the office. If you need to get away, I don't know, you get away from your child or your wife, or there's construction happening at home and you just need to get out, then the office remains accessible. Now, what is important is my commitment to make sure that every single person, regardless of their choice of work model, enjoys the same access. Now, the third one, and Pradeep spoke about this earlier as well, is trust and empathy. So we had to teach our managers to trust and let go. You just gotta let go. I mean, if that guy is telling you that he is working while he's really in Bangsa enjoying happy hour, he's going to do that. You have no control over it. All you can base your work on is whether or not deliverables are met, right? We're all guilty of, like, people say, oh, I don't micromanage. I mean, like, everyone is guilty of micromanaging. In one way or the other, you will obsess about it, you will stress about it, you will think about it. You would also like to think that you're not a micromanager. So good on you, right? But it's in the back of your head, right? So I think one of the things that I did while I still, stress over things that I shouldn't be stressing about, I just base everything on timelines. So for as long as something's delivered to me by 5 o'clock in the evening, then we're good. If it's not delivered to me by 5 o'clock in the evening, then we'll have a problem, right? And the other thing that I've also set up with my teams, or I think a lot of managers have set up with their teams, is like, if I've asked you once, then I've asked you twice, right? Like, so instead of me coming back for the third ask, please just make sure that it's delivered, because those are the levels, the work levels that I hold for myself, and I would like to uphold the same for my teams, right? So trusting, letting go, that's something that's very important. Empathy. If someone tells you that, if someone takes, I think Pradeep had this amazing example earlier, and I was like, oh my goodness, I feel like he's been watching me, right? Because, like, how many times has it happened, like, so you ask someone for something and then the person doesn't rock up at work? They suddenly have COVID. The whole family has COVID, right? And I'm like, okay, this is, in your head, you're like, I knew it. I just knew he was going to do this, right? Like, we're all guilty of it. So empathy is super important. You just need to over-empathize. And this is something that I always ask, like, for my managers to do as well, like the people managers who report into me, and then, of course, to the wider team, all right? Facilities. Now, so I think facilities is something that a lot of us, how many people went back to, like, completely dilapidated offices after the pandemic? One person? Two? That's it? I went back to an office which was flooded, right? And we have, like, wooden flooring, so that flooring, the flooring was, like, completely messed up, and we were like, how did this even happen, right? Like, and we were essential services, so we all had movement letters, we could move around, and I think it was probably 2 weeks where the cases were really high, and I was like, okay, I'm just going to stay in, and also because my building looked borderline haunted during the lockdown, and I was like, I don't think I want to go into the office right now. But anyway, 2 weeks after, when I went into the office, like the flooring was like peeling. It was like those fungus and what have you, right? So of course the admin team had to come in and work overtime to build and make sure that our facilities are well maintained, and it's basically adaptable for like pandas, regardless of whether they're at home or working remotely. So we mean infrastructure, your IT services, your admin services, your finance services, all of those things need to be built, right? People shouldn't feel like I have to go to the office because I need to talk to someone from finance. That doesn't work anymore. You can talk to finance from wherever. You can process your claims from wherever. It shouldn't be like, oh, talent acquisition is not responding to me. I need to go to the office and look for them. No, right? It should be anywhere, everywhere, anytime, and maybe sometimes not all the time, right? Like, so I think boundaries is also something which is very important, right? So when I say facilities, I also think like teaching people how to be able to respect boundaries, or core hours versus like hours which were like okay but not so okay. That was also very important, right? There's no hard and fast rule here. It's just more of like depending on your organization. That's something that I would highly like work towards. Now, then number 5 is engagement. This is another thing that a lot of us did throughout the pandemic, right? Again, we all became Kung Fu Pandas, right? We developed like, oh my goodness, the most preposterous things, right? And while it looked really good on your PowerPoint presentations before you asked finance for money, the reality of it was, is this going to be sustainable? Am I really going to bring in like 680 people from different parts of Kuala Lumpur in light of the pandemic, into like a secluded place and make sure that they all remain safe at it? No, that just didn't make sense at all, right? But we did it. Some of us did it. We did it really well. And didn't get caught, thank God. Well, we did. We got caught. We actually got fined because we had like an event that overran at our own premise, right? But I mean, I'm just keeping it real here because yeah, there's transparency is very important, right? Like, so learn from my mistakes. Don't do those things. If it's at 11 o'clock hard stop, 11 o'clock hard stop. Or if you're going to like go slightly beyond, turn off the lights. Be smart about it. We weren't very smart about it. All right, so engagement, I think the one thing that we all lost during the pandemic, throughout the pandemic and lockdowns, was human touch, right? I mean, how many single people do we have in the room? Can I have a show of hands? How's dating now? No? Still hard, right? Yeah, I understand, all right? Because, I mean, human touch is something which completely went out the window, and even now we're struggling with it, right? Like I said earlier, sometimes you don't know, do I shake your hand, do I give you a fist bump, right? But keeping your team engaged is something which is so important regardless of where they are. And when I say engagement, I do not mean team parties or annual dinners or get-togethers, physical get-togethers. You need to be able to make sure that your people remain engaged and in touch with each other. So at foodpanda, we did a couple of different things. We had like things like weekly kickoffs where all pandas would just log on and connect with each other. We also do these things where leads would get together with their respective teams twice a week, just to connect. And I think these are things that a lot of people have done. A lot of people in this room has definitely done already. So engagement is super, super important in that sense. And like engagement also goes back to your people feeling like they are connected to a greater purpose at work. They're not just working for the paycheck. They need to feel like, oh, hey, I actually enjoy what I'm doing because I'm empowering single mothers in the outskirts who now have a job and are able to sell food on foodpanda, right, by way of home chefs, etc. All right? Now, all of these things that we put into place, like so making hybrid work, it's super important to remember that you want to remain flexible while doing it all. So internally, we obviously had like surveys, and like when all of these things were put into motion and put into motion properly, we saw a definitely a 77% decrease in attrition, right? So we had our people like stay with the organization longer, and we also had like really good positive output on our internal employee net promoter scores as well as engagement. So at foodpanda, like I said earlier, one of the biggest things that I wanted to enforce was making sure that I just because people at a table are laughing doesn't mean they're happy. Right? So you need to ask them these questions in isolation. Like when they're by themselves, like send them a little like survey and like see what they really feel about it. Now, so here we have, so you'll see like I use the word panda in a lot of things, right? Like so it's a pandaverse, right? How many of you are familiar with Pao Pao? Come on. I almost feel like you should be a part of my team with that pink jacket already. In a way you are? Nice. Okay. Like how many of you are familiar with Pao Pao? He's my pride and joy. Everyone needs to be familiar with Pao Pao, right? So Pao Pao is all about the pandaverse, right? And like at foodpanda, the things that we did is we want to make sure that, again, going back to like making sure you're empowering your people both professionally as well as personally. So this is split between two. In the pink quadrants, you'll see the professional things that we have in space. So we have financial wellness, we have learning, we have work-life balance, and culture. And in the yellow quadrants is for personal effects that we have in motion right now. Physical wellness, lifestyle, health, mental wellness. Now, there are different things that we do, and I'm pretty sure a lot of these things are things that you've done as well, right? From like online Zumba lessons to yoga sessions in person, to working with organizations on like mental well-being initiatives. Also creating ERPs. Now ERPs is something that I'm very passionate about. So ERPs at foodpanda are employee resource groups, where we make sure instead of me pushing my agenda down your throats, we have little focus groups that tell us what would be able to help them. So we've actually created 3. It's not on the screen, but I'll share it with you. One for parents, one for women coming back to work, or women basically in leadership, and the third one for the LGBTQ communities within like our functions, because we don't want anyone to feel marginalized or ostracized, right? Our main thing is to make sure everyone and anyone feels welcomed, anyone and everyone feels equally treated within the organization. Now, based on that, after implementing those things and then having testimonials, like I said, I'm a big fan of like surveys. So like when surveys go out, we realized that we had a 91% increase on people actually enjoying the work culture. 87% of people really enjoy the benefits that we have in place, be the mental health benefits or your insurance benefits or your wellness and leisure allowance, etc. And then 80% of our employees feel like they're actually receiving more trust from their managers and the appropriate corresponding support. And then, of course, as every Malaysian would enjoy, 63% enjoys like the holidays that we have in place. Now, so of course, we are also not very strict with like public holidays or gazetted holidays that we actually observe. Like sometimes out of nowhere, the management team will decide that, hey, let's just throw in an additional day or, an additional day off to be credited into your annual leave entitlements, etc. All right, so in wrapping up, I think, again, I'm not going to say that what we have done at foodpanda is the way forward, not at all. It's just, I'm still struggling and I'm still trying to figure it out. I think a lot of us are still trying to figure it out. I'm still kung fu pandaing if I'm being 100% honest, right? It's a trial and error. 2020 saw us like developing like these amazing things. 2021 saw us actually trying to stay alive while keeping the things that we developed, like making sure that they were sustainable, right? 2022 saw us like probably, getting a bit more grounded and like, figuring out our footing. And like, I think in 2023, I think 2023 is going to be an interesting year for a lot of us, especially in the HR space, with a lot of, in Malaysia, for instance, with the changing political landscape, the the impending recession, which we are going to be stepping into, and I don't know, God knows what else is going to be coming our way. So I feel like 2023 is going to be interesting for us, right? But I think the goal for me is really just to enable diversity. It's to ensure work-life integration and emotional resilience as a sustainable working model. And sustainability is super important for me at this point, right? Like it's because it's super important that it's also crucial that we are able to see through our promises. Otherwise, you're just going to come across as weak or unstable, right? Yeah, so I mean, I really believe that further enhancing the things that I already have, or we already have in place, would really mean providing pandas more access and performing better and bringing the organization, I hope, to greater heights, right? In wrapping up, I think the case study is entirely concluded on the fact that you need to put your people first, and like keep in mind that the ball now has like shifted courts. It's no longer in your court. We no longer get to decide who we want, but it's they who decide whether or not they want us, right? Yeah, so with that, I thank you all for staying awake. Thank you so much. I will remain here for a couple of questions if anyone has questions. Okay. So I will hand it over then. Thank you so much.